Jujutsu Kaisen, or rather, Jumpjutsu Kaisen, is a series well known for its multi-character battles. If it's a major fight in the story, chances are that one of the fighters is getting teamed up on, with no regard for fairness or running the ones. And while this does make for a funny ongoing joke within the community, I do think that this structure of fight plays a massive part into the themes and overall presentation of the story. So today, I want to talk about the importance of jumping in Jujutsu Kaisen and why it matters to the story more than you may think. When it comes to team battles or groups of characters ganging up on another, specifically with this manga, there are a few different reasons I think it plays into Jujutsu Kaisen's overarching narrative and the appeal of the story in general. Firstly, I find that the jumping aspects of these fights allows for character and power system dynamics that would otherwise be impossible in a one-on-one situation. How certain curse techniques, domains, and sorcerer mentalities mesh and clash with one another is significantly easier to demonstrate when more characters are being thrown into the mix, and the showing off of more than one character fighting one opponent simultaneously allows for a constant contrast between those two to be more easily put on display. Take a relatively low stakes fight like Yuji and Megumi versus Awasaka, for example. While far from the greatest and most climactic fight even within its own arc, Gege is able to pretty casually reveal a few things about both characters in regards to their fighting style, while also doubling down on traits that have been explained to us at earlier points in the manga. Yuji's extreme levels of strength, agility, and finesse are put on display here, as these physical attributes are used properly when combined with Megumi's extremely versatile and adaptable technique paired with his strategic mind. Seeing Megumi pick up on Awasaka's curse technique is one thing, but having that only be possible because of Megumi noticing he was able to survive strikes from Yuji, yet feared some strikes from his weaker Shikigami is another. Yuji not being as quick on the uptake also serves to show an experience and general outlook gap that these two have as sorcerers, but he later makes up for his deficiency in very active cognitive situations with intuition and physical might. Him throwing a card at Awasaka isn't something that Megumi could pull off so casually, and changing from a swing that can be perceived as one made out of desperation to instantly switching gears and lightening the blow is something that Megumi even comments on as extremely impressive given the context, at least in his own Megumi-like fashion. This pragmatic use of squad fights isn't just limited to this battle, but basically every jumping in the entire story. Whether it be a reveal of character or power, Gege almost always uses these fights to highlight, demonstrate, create, or develop some aspect of his characters in a way that simply isn't possible when fighting alone. In Yuji and Nobara's fight against Eso and Kechizu, Nobara's physical shortcomings as a sorcerer are put front and center. Yuji's required to get both of them out of a rather sticky situation, and it's in showing this that we get an even more impactful demonstration of Yuji's speed by comparing it to Nobara's rather limited physical capabilities. This lack of physical excellence is later then compensated for and contrasted by her rather insane pain tolerance, quality technique, and mentality surrounding how she uses it. Where the difference between the two students really shows itself though is in what I would essentially call the post-game interview of the fight against Eso and Kechizu. When reflecting on the battle and their actions, Nobara is quick to think about how she's been physically scarred by the conflict, while it's clear that Yuji's scars are much more psychological. This isn't to say that Nobara has no regard for life, but it's clear in their conversation that she is much more okay than Yuji, despite what their appearances may show. Yuji can't just square away killing as well as Nobara can, and while Gege could have certainly made this apparent in other ways, having them fight and kill together allows for this highlighting of character to become even more poignant by contrasting their personalities and morals against one another. The developmental aspect of jumping in JJK is also quite interesting, and I find them to be the most prominent in fights that Todo participates in. Gege really nailed Todo as a character from top to bottom, and you can see that clearly in how he pushes Itadori forward whenever they work together. Specifically in Shibuya, Todo is the catalyst, second really only to Mahito, in the discovery of Yuji's cog-like mentality and the determination to act as a sorcerer that will exercise curses to the bitter end. It's his speech about sorcerers and their exceptionalism, his explanation of the plight of their job, and his demonstration of their purpose even in death that is the spark that allows Yuji to land his. Could Yuji have somehow arrived at the same conclusion without Todo? Possibly, but only with a pretty intense rewrite of the events of Shibuya, and even then, I think someone would be necessary to aid Yuji in his time of need. Someone would have to join in on this fight against Mahito, much like Nanami and Nobara had. Speaking of these two characters, I think that they embody the risk of death and how that'll impact any given character in a fight, really well. Nanami's exiting of the story was what hardened Yuji's resolve to fight Mahito, and to the bitter end, he served as the perfect example to Yuji as what a sorcerer should really be. Nobara's departure wasn't quite as inspiring. Instead of building Yuji up and making him capable of bearing the weight of a sorcerer even more, she functioned to be the final straw on a camel's back that had been bearing a lot up to this point. All of Yuji's volatile emotions came crashing down immediately after the high of having Nobara show him that he's not alone, and Gege's only capable of achieving such a stomach-churning moment because of how important and consistent these team battles are in the manga. Just like Yuji, the audience is led to believe that the next step of the fight will focus on Yuji and Nobara fighting Mahito, this dynamic duo that was able to achieve a Black Flash before, going up against Yuji's arch nemesis up to this point in the story. But that expectation is subverted and warped in an instant, and it absolutely crushes him. Yuji hitting that rock bottom though sets him up quite well to ascend, which is the purpose that Todo served that I mentioned a bit earlier in the video. Some of these fights that I've mentioned are my personal favorite examples of Jumpjutsu Kaisen coming into play, but I don't think that these are the only group fights that accomplish something like this. Megumi and Maki versus Hanami, Yuji and Nanami versus Mahito, Yuji and Todo versus Hanami, everyone versus Dagon, Yuta's battle against Sendai Colony, and most recently, the Sukuna Gauntlet all serve to achieve one of or multiple of the points mentioned in this video thus far. Secondarily, I think this format of fighting allows for a differentiation from other manga in terms of presentation that's absolutely essential for a battle shonen like JJK. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of well-known anime and manga fights where the protagonists are jumping the main antagonist of the arc, but very few do it as well, as consistently as Jujutsu Kaisen, nor do very many battle shonen that I've read put so much emphasis on the most climactic battles in any given arc be the result of multiple characters fighting and defeating one. Jujutsu Kaisen is relatively unique in that sense. Yuji versus Mahito isn't resolved one-on-one. Yuji is only able to finally land a Black Flash and defeat his arch nemesis through the use of Todo's intelligence, technique, and craftiness as a sorcerer. And if the most recent chapters of the manga are anything to go off of, Yuji versus Sukuna won't be resolved via individual strength either. Defeating some of the most important villainous characters in this story without the protagonist fighting solo certainly isn't unheard of, but there is a reason Jujutsu Kaisen has earned a particular reputation for it. Not only does adding this element spice things up for fans of battle shonen manga that came before, but the choreography also gets some seasoning as well. So many different curse techniques and aspects of Jujutsu sorcery in general just get used in these fights, and it's always a blast. Certain techniques like Boogie Woogie are even made for the teamwork we see pulled off throughout the story, and that just makes the fights significantly more entertaining and definitely adds a unique flair that you associate with JJK off rip. Some of the coolest moments in the entire manga come as a direct result of cooperation between sorcerers, and that's no coincidence. It's not an accident on Gege's part. There's a palpable excitement that comes with the prospect of two characters working together that we've never seen pair up before, because we know that Gege's gonna put on a show with them. When Maki showed up to help Yuji fight Sukuna, that was exhilarating even though the battle only lasted for a chapter, because we got a glimpse into what these two physical monsters working together would look like. This extends to many other dynamic duos or even larger groups that we see fight in the manga. Yuji and Nanami, Yuji and Higuruma, Yuji and Yuta, Yuji and Choso, Yuta and Takaba. None of these dynamic duos last for a super long time relative to the entire story, yet it's satisfying to see them work together, even if only for a moment, because we're basically guaranteed new character dynamics and are definitely privy to new ways that these curse techniques can be used and applied in a fight. There's a reason that Yuji typically acts as the center of these cooperative efforts, by the way, and it's not just because he's the main character, but I'll address why that is in a second. On the whole, Gege giving us these fights so often simply allows for himself as an artist so good at constructing good action sequences to have even more pieces on the board to work with and manipulate. If at any given moment he wants to subtract a fighter for a bit, restrict the scope of this battle, he's more than able to do so and focus things to get more of an intimate perspective. But having the possibility of a character being thrown back into the fray just gives Gege more breathing room and room to play around with certain variables. The great thing about having 2v1s, 3v1s, 4v1s is that at the end of the day, Gege is able to manipulate these things to have many one-on-one battles, yet still provide a lot of the flair, a lot of the drama that comes with Jumpjutsu Kaisen being so prominent. Much of Jujutsu Kaisen's quality has to be attributed strictly to Gege's drawing ability and proclivity for action sequences, but I don't think how important the concept of jumping being used so frequently should be downplayed either. I mentioned Yuji's importance to the very topic of this video just a moment ago, and I think it's time to circle back around to that. You see, up to this point, I've covered two very prominent and important aspects of Jumpjutsu Kaisen and its narrative value to the story outside of funny jokes. The reveal of certain things through contrast and the enhancement of choreography through variety. But there is, however, a third and final advantage that comes with that I'd actually argue is the most important that I could possibly mention, that being the conveying of the thematic objective of Jujutsu Kaisen. It may seem silly to some to argue that jumping is integral to the theme of JJK, but the fights playing out as they do is integral to the core themes of this story coming across without wasting pages to come out and say it so blatantly. To explain what I mean, I think referencing Gojo's dream is important. I'm sure by this point it's something that you're very familiar with, but in chapter 11, Gojo reveals to Ijichi his dream, his goal as a Jujutsu sorcerer and teacher, and it's to foster a generation of strong and intelligent sorcerers like himself. His dream isn't to kill the higher-ups and take control, nor is it to be the strongest until the day that he dies. Gojo recognizes a rather simple truth of his world and ours that is impossible to escape. Change cannot be enacted by one person. Real, long-lasting, wide-spreading change is not the result of one person's actions, no matter how important they may think themselves to be or how special the world around them may say that they are. Change can be sparked by the actions or words of one individual, but it is the masses that move the world. It's people that make real, lasting change in society, even in a supernatural one. Now, I wouldn't necessarily call JJK a piece of fiction that's revolutionary in nature, but it does heavily advocate for concerted efforts superseding individual exceptionalism. And if you doubt that to be true, just think back through some of the most pivotal plot points in the entire manga. Some of the greatest defeats in this story come from weaker characters banding together to take down the strong. Gojo is sealed like that. Kenjaku is beaten like that. And while Sukuna's defeat has not yet been set in stone, I'm a firm believer that Sukuna's death will come from the efforts of many weak people working together. This solidarity trumps the isolationist ideology of many of Jujutsu Kaisen's strongest, and in the eye of this storm stands none other than our protagonist, Yuji Itadori, the person Sukuna despises the most, and a sorcerer that Gojo had extremely high hopes for. One look at Yuji's abilities up to this point, and you'll understand exactly why his existence is the physical embodiment of collaboration, cooperation, and organization amongst weak or not as strong sorcerers in the verse. His toughness, speed, and strength don't come from strength training or something that he sought out. This is a direct result of Kenjaku's tampering and Sukuna's twin possessing a similar potential level as him. His prodigious relation to cursed energy, that isn't something that came about from Yuji being a lone genius. Rather, as we know now, this is a direct result of being Sukuna's vessel and experiencing the heights of sorcery firsthand. Blood manipulation, the first technique he actually developed and utilized, comes from the consumption of his brothers, something he isn't capable of manifesting on his own like Choso. Convergence merely being the physical extension of that fact, literally being unable to compress his blood properly without the assistance of his brother on the battlefield. Even Shrine, the technique that we knew Yuji was destined to get since chapter 12, only comes as a direct result of Sukuna engraving his curse technique onto Yuji's body. He was essentially gifted one of his strongest assets in this battle. Reverse curse technique, simple domain, even a domain expansion, all abilities that Switch training allowed him to develop. All abilities that he was only able to achieve through a concerted effort pouring into him. When I say all of this, I'm not meaning to discredit Itadori's hard work, his tears, his blood, or his sweat. In actuality, I think Yuji being able to acquire all of these abilities only because of the people that are around him to uplift him is a narratively perfect move on Gege Akutami's part. When a story's theme hinges on group efforts and people being more important than any given person, the world should reflect that, and so should its protagonist. Yuji doing so in such a blatant and consistent way is emblematic of that fact, and his cooperative nature makes him the perfect dance partner that he is in these massive team battles. Yuji is a beacon of humanity's ability to work together, and aside from simply being the focal point of the story, it's why he's so consistently paired with other characters to fight with. Yuji is like a sponge, even beyond his existence as a vessel, absorbing everything around him while never becoming more important than the whole. The cog that he is an important one for sure, one that allows for the clock to keep ticking forward, but no more than a cog he is. And that seems to be the point, the very purpose of this manga, and one of the many reasons he so deeply bothers Sukuna, an individualist to his core. Jumping conceptually, much like Yuji, is a physical and practical manifestation of collaboration that falls directly in line with the core themes of the manga. And it's for that, and every other reason mentioned in this video, that jumping is so important in Jujutsu Kaisen. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more analysis content like this on a plethora of different stories, subscribe and hit the bell. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.